Did you know that a lot of digestive issues are caused by a potential toxin that's in all of the quote healthy foods that scientists have been telling us to eat with a fraudulent food pyramid for the longest time? Warning signs include weight gain and fatigue, digestive discomfort and stiff joints, even skin problems. Well, Dr. Gundry, a world-renowned cardiologist, explains these side effects are often mistaken for normal signs of aging because digestive issues develop usually over a matter of years and sometimes even decades. He says the damage is probably caused by these health foods and it's far from normal. The good news is you can easily help fix the problem from your own home. It's very simple. You just have to know which foods are actually healthy and which contain this hidden potential toxin. So you can go find this yourself at gutcleanseprotocol.com/inspired, because after years of research, Dr. Gundry has decided to release an informative video to the public, free and uninterrupted, showcasing exactly which foods you need to avoid. Go find that video at gutcleanseprotocol.com/inspired or click on the link in the video description below.
Hello there, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Inspired live stream. Let me begin this here. Happy Sunday. Depending on when you're tuning in, let me begin this with we're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free, the mantra of the Inspired live stream. And we're thankful that you're here. Ronnie, good to see you. 2Tim3, good to see you. Frederick, John Silver from Maine. Beautiful state. We haven't been, but some very, very dear friends are up there. White Cliffs. Hugs to Texas, Ronnie. Let's get into it. Let's jump into it, friends. I want to honor your time, everybody's time. And this is a subject that we on and off talk about, but I think we need to dive deeper. As we are seeing, the world is in chaos. And I'm not just talking about the big things like the war zones. I'm talking about the pain and the suffering that's happening inside of people that a lot of times we don't see, and we just see the effects. They seem sad, they seem depressed, people are having difficulties. Of course, people are having financial difficulties, and there's a plethora of things. And I want to say something right off the bat before I go into the subject here. I so admire the human spirit, because even though there's such an onslaught every day, not just in the media, but with everything, with what's in the water, what's in the food, what's in the air, everything frequency-wise, the human spirit is still shining through, and that just is beautiful. But the journey of truth is really one where you cannot leave any layers of the onion unpeeled. And that's exactly where we need to go with this subject. Why is the world really in such chaos? Why can people be over and over and over again manipulated to react in certain ways? Why do people support certain things, or why do they go along with certain things? And there's a reason for that. And that reason, once we really get to the core of it and we do what needs to be done, that's the way out. And I hope that we can get to that understanding or understanding together. We had a guest on maybe 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, I forget, but Theo Fleury, and some of you, the sports fans, the athletes in you might know him. He was one of the most successful hockey players of all time. And then he came out and he talked about his past and how he was abused as a young teenager by his coach. And now that's, of course, after his career. Now he's traveling, speaking, teaching, helping, healing. And he said one thing so beautifully that we agree on, why we connected so deeply. Trauma is at the root of all suffering in this world and why the world is the way it is. But I want to unpack it, not just use these flashy words like trauma that for so many people don't really mean something. And I want to start with the current woke generation. And let's for the moment here leave the judgment at the door, because when we understand why they behave the way they do, we might understand what is happening in the world at large better. So today, all you have to do is open your, I mean, if you live close to if you're in a college town, or you just live in a town where there's a lot of high schools and colleges, then Of course, you see this more. There are smaller towns and more conservative leaning towns where this is a little less obvious. But you now have a whole generation of young people who are, as it would seem to us, that are completely detached from reality. And they are promoting things and living in ways and expressing themselves in ways that seems to us to be unhinged and unhealthy and wrong. So, but the question is, how was it possible to manipulate these young people, and now older and older people, by the way, to manipulate them in this kind of behavior? Well, the reason why this is possible is the same reason why people kill each other. It's the same reason why people support wars, or support sort of this ingrained belief that there has to be winners and losers and all of that. And that is literally trauma. So in the past, just a generation ago, kids that were traumatized were dealt with differently. And oftentimes people didn't understand there was trauma. What they understood was there is a child, there's a teenager that's more than usual, more than normal confused, right? Doesn't fit in. And so what the reaction was oftentimes of parents and teachers was, okay, um, let's see if we can find a space where this child belongs, right? Whether it's a club, a group, a sport, music, something, because ultimately every human being wants to belong. And there was sort of an attempt to deal with these, to deal with these children who don't fit anywhere in a way that could be considered helpful. It wasn't understood really deeply, but this is kind of how it was done. Today, the trauma, the spiritual illness, the unhealed pain is being perpetuated by not showing ways to heal it and overcome it, but by actually supporting it more, by giving this generation, I don't know, 100 genders, and giving it a million different expressions to marginalize them, to victimize them, and to manage their victimization rather than allow them to heal. And the world at large doesn't function much differently. So what is really trauma? Because I think a lot of people don't understand what that means. Trauma, by the way, in our society and the way we live today, it's happening to everybody on different levels, but it has happened to everybody. It is basically an inflicted pain, whether it's spiritual, physical, or mental pain, psychological pain, that causes a reaction by our brain to compartmentalize the experience, right? Why would it do that? Because if it wouldn't compartmentalize and kind of create a boundary around this experience, a capsule, if you will, it would constantly 24/7 be in your mind, in your awareness, and you couldn't function. Especially think about real substantial intense trauma, abuse, horrific violence, and all of those things. The brain has these abilities to compartmentalize and kind of shut that, or shove that in the background, or shove it deep down. And the more extreme the trauma, usually the more it's deeply hidden from the present awareness. However, it still has huge effects on people every day. And so when they were rejected as young children, when they were subjected to violence, verbal, physical, psychological, when they were completely misunderstood, when a child, when it's so open and suggestive and creative and connected, when it's being very harshly treated, something shuts down and a trauma reaction is created. So usually for the vast majority of people, whatever that was, and continues to happen through our life, by the way, whatever that is usually not really looked at. It's not really healed. It's not really addressed, because a lot of times people don't know that, right? They don't even remember that. They just know something feels off. They feel depressed. They feel sad. They have a hard time dealing with life, or they turn, they develop aggressions, a tendency to violence, whether that's physical or whether that's verbal violence, or they self-inflict harm. They cut themselves, or they take drugs, or they turn to addictions. There's so many ways that trauma expresses in someone's life, but the vast majority does not heal. And then there's a whole different aspect of it, which is called multi-generational trauma or inherited trauma. And that's a whole different aspect of this that I'm going to get into in a moment here. But this very fact that we live in a traumatizing world, in a traumatizing way of life, and it doesn't matter if you live in Asia, if you live in Europe, if you live in Africa, if you live in North America, fundamentally, we live in a traumatizing society that where the value of a real harmonious human experience, upbringing, and life is so little. There's so little value attached to that over the value of materialism, of more, of greed, of power, right? And so that's why people usually do not heal or don't even know that something is wrong with them, because the approach was suck it up, buttercup, get tougher and push through it. But after so many generations of trauma, there is no more strength to push through it. At some point, the healing needs to happen. And if we look at the world today, from the politicians to the business people, or I mean the big finance people, and we're of course not going into the layer above this reality that we live in, but if we just look at the reality that we live in, they are all traumatized. I have spent I've had the great experience or honor of meeting some of the most influential people in the world, whether that's in politics or whether that's in the economy and finance. Simply throughout my life, I was kind of just had the opportunity to meet with them. And what always puzzled me is they were oftentimes commanding or we're running huge businesses, or we're running even countries or states or whatever. And when they were in a room with you around a table, you could see their insecurities. You could see their unhealed pain. You could see why they behaved the way they behaved. You could see how they dealt with their employees or their staff. And I was, over and over and over again, I realized, and we realized, Christina and I realized, these are all hurt people. And what do hurt people do? They hurt people. So if we don't understand that, and if we sort of just take the approach, let's react to what we see on the surface. Let's fight these people, and let's fight those people, and let's go to war with these folks here. Then we will never get out of this cycle. Look at how many soldiers come back from a war zone, right? From a tour, and they are completely traumatized, and nobody knows how to deal with it. Then they get drugs. If they get care at all, they get drugs and are kind of being shut down. But we need to understand that what this world really needs and what we really need is healing. And we can accept healing much easier on a physical level, and that's necessary. What is really hard for a lot of people to comprehend is the healing that needs to take place on a spiritual and psychological level. And Christine and I are predicting this, and have been, that the field of trauma healing will be the most important line of work in the next years and decades. Because ultimately, more and more people will understand that this is what kept them in the loops of their lives that they didn't like. The loop where you run into the same situation over and over again. The loop where you have the same relationships over and over again. The loop where you have the same limitations. You stay within a very small comfort zone, or a discomfort zone, shall I say. And understanding that this is not simply your circumstances. It's not your character. It's not because you were born into a certain family. It's because of the unhealed trauma. And so what it does is it basically doesn't allow you to access all the capabilities and skills and faculties. And so often it does not allow you to access a more direct and beautiful relationship with spirit. All of that is hindered by trauma. And then the body begins to create dis-ease, because when the spirit, when the psyche is sick and the psyche is hurt, well, then the body begins to react to that, because that's the computer that runs everything. And so the body begins to create dis-ease. And so often we only look at the physical reasons, the physical, manifestations of that, and we don't go deep enough. Because ultimately, and that's my belief, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not giving medical advice, but my belief is that all dis-ease ultimately stems from trauma, from unhealed trauma. Could be multi-generational, of course. So what do you do with it? Well, the first thing is that we have to acknowledge, that almost all of us have had trauma experiences. And I'm not saying they're all the same. It's very different. If you've been subjected to horrific abuse, that's a much more impactful kind of trauma than, of course, than others who simply had, let's say, a parent that was just not very loving with them, or that would be very strict or something like that. But nonetheless, this is not the way it was meant to be. The way we live today was not the way it was meant to be. So the first thing is acknowledgement. The second thing is wanting it to change. Because if those two things don't happen, whatever comes next won't work. So wanting to change means taking responsibility. And this is where a lot of people, even though they now realize they had been traumatized, they have a problem with that, because in their mind, it should be the person who did the traumatizing, who was maybe the abuser, who was the one who inflicted the pain, that should deal with it. But no matter how much we want it to be this way, it isn't this way. Even though we might not have been responsible for the trauma that was inflicted upon us, we are responsible for the healing, and that's just the way it is. There's no way around this. So if we accept, assume, and really embody this responsibility, then we can go and say, okay, I need help with this. Because trust me, there's only so many levels that you can reach yourself. This mechanism that allows us to function, to go and go to work and have a family and live life, even though we had been traumatized, this mechanism won't allow you usually to access the states and the layers that you need to access in order to heal. So that's where we start asking for help. And I'm just going to give you the two processes that Christine and I have been using, and Christine has been using with not just for herself, but with many clients over the years. And she's done many sessions that work, that we know that work. I'm not saying these are the only ones, and there's other great methodologies out there, but I can only really present something to you that I have personal experience with. Number one is a process called The Journey. thejourney.com, and we put the links in the description here for you all. We're not associated, by the way, with these processes or with these companies or people who facilitate the healing. We just really appreciate it. And if you go to our website, then you can go to healing. That's on theinspiredchannel.com. Our daughter Kiara actually is in the final stages of becoming a journey practitioner after 2 years of training, lots of practical training. I mean, they have to do all the self-work first, and then they have to do ultimately hundreds of hours with other people before they become full-on practitioners. And you can go to that website and if you feel inspired and book a session with her. Again, that's theinspiredchannel.com, and then you go under healing. But generally speaking, on thejourney.com, you can find more information about this process. It is a process that you do one time, or let's say a couple hours at a time, and then you might go back for a second or third session. But it is not something that goes on and on and on. That's not the kind of work that we're talking about here. And while I won't run you through the whole process here, what it does is somebody, a practitioner, is guiding you through your emotional layers, especially those the layers that you can't access with your conscious state awareness. So with their guidance, they're putting you in a deeper state, the state that you were in when the trauma happened. And so now, in that deeper state, you have access to the memory, and then there is a process that allows for the healing to take place. It's very beautiful. I've done it myself many times, and it's still something we do from time to time. It's sort of a kind of a cleanup process. The second modality, and it's not an either or, I would suggest it's both. But the second modality goes even deeper because it actually allows people to access multi-generational trauma in a way that they usually couldn't, and that's called family constellation therapy or systemic constellation therapy. This is a kind of work where the practitioners need to have a lot of experience to do it in a good way. So there's really only two people we can recommend. One that's here in America, Mark Wolin, and we put the link in the video description, markwolin.com. And then there's one that's in the German-speaking world in Austria, Dr. Heinz Domig, and we put the link in the description too, that are really highly experienced professionals that we recommend. And why would you do family constellation therapy? First off, it doesn't mean you have to bring your whole family. You still go there by yourself if you work with someone. But it is basically a way where we can find out what might have happened in the family history 1 or 2 generations back that was never talked about, that was never healed, and that was passed on to the next generations, right? And that now you might be suffering from, but you don't know where it comes from. So these are the two modalities that we know work wonderfully. And there are others, of course, out there, but those are the ones we have a lot of experience with and that we have seen work over and over and over again. In my estimation, almost every human being will have to go through some sort of healing, because it will allow us, when that healing starts to take place, then there is no more necessity to stay in the same circle and the same cycle, shall I say, that we're in right now. And we don't have to individually and as a society continue repeating the same cycles. We can actually move beyond and past them. And after that, after the trauma healing, for those of you who have gone through either physical or spiritual or psychological trauma healing processes, now is the time when the healing has when the bulk of the healing has happened, where we need to retrain ourselves, because our bodies, and this is so important. Most people don't get this. Our bodies are sort of like computers and computer programs, if you will. And what we teach them, they will perpetuate. So if we teach our body that stress happens at certain times of the day or of the week, that at certain times of the day, the body will get sugar, or will get any other kind of input or alcohol or whatever, after a while, the body begins to produce the chemistry that anticipates this kind of behavior. And so when it doesn't happen, the body craves it, even if it's negative behavior like addiction or aggression, right? The body will still demand that you react in that way because that's what you trained it to do. So that's where the discipline kicks in, where we start retraining ourselves and we actually begin using affirmative, positive, and creative actions, where we do things that are good for us, where we exercise, where we walk, where we meditate, where we pray, we put healthy and nutritious foods in our body. And then we need to train the body to crave that, to get used to that. And it will then produce the body chemistry that makes you wake up at 6:30 in the morning and go, oh, I want to move, or I want to meditate, I want to pray, I want to do this, I want to breathe deeply. This is then the next step. And the thing is that while we are looking into the world of politics, into the world of justice, into the world of military, maybe for solutions, they can only perpetuate what the general program is running. we, in our healing, in our new ways, are ultimately the solution, because out of that, new reactions will come. Right now, we are as emotionally driven as we've ever been, which means that so many people simply react from their emotional trauma response, and they don't even know it. They just react. They don't think, they don't analyze, they don't comprehend, they don't intuitively check in. None of this. It's just, oh, jump on this, pick a side, go into the fight. And this is what the trauma response is, and it's what mainly the reptilian brain runs the show then. And this is what has been going on for such a long time. But now you see the generation of my grandparents and parents, they were the war generation, Second World War in Europe, and the post-war generation, like were born right after the war. So which means they didn't have they didn't even have the time, but there was no talk about these things. Young men came back from war if they survived, and they were expected to rebuild the countries, rebuild the economies, rebuild life, have babies, have families, and function. There was no time for healing. So they passed it on to the next generation, their children who were born and who were still in this environment that didn't have the understanding or even the capacity to think about these things. But it's different now. Now we must have the capacity to think about these things and go into healing. And that is a decision that has to happen on an individual level. And you also, I want to talk a little bit to the parents here, and the parents, especially of children that are acting up, that are hyper aggressive, can't focus and whatnot. When Christine did one-on-one coachings and parents would come with their children, parents would usually want to bring their child and kind of go, okay, fix him or fix her. And Christine always started working with the parents first, because that's where it originates, right? You go with the parents first. And when that work is done, a lot of the problems in the child will start to subside, by the way, usually. And then you do the work with the child. And the beautiful thing is that there's very little left. Children are usually so easy to accept healing and to accept positive change. They don't have all these, preconceived notions about these things. So I would say that for those who have become very awakened, very conscious, who want to live a more spiritual life or healthier life, a peaceful life, this is so important. And the struggle is the greatest until we make that choice. So here's how it works for most people, or has in the past. They usually experience trauma in their early childhood. And so then they walked through their whole lives and lived their whole lives with that trauma unhealed. And it expressed in various different ways, in their relationships, in their bodies. And that's how they came to the end of their physical life, and it never fundamentally, things had never really changed, because that's what they were programmed with. Now we have the opportunity, because we know better, because we have more access, because we have more communication, because we have more tools available. Now we can actually go and say, okay, it's time for me to heal. And then you will change. Inevitably, you will change. However you reacted before, you won't react like that anymore. You won't be as antsy or as anxious or as aggressive or as depressed, because the root cause is beginning to be transformed. And last but not least, I just want to say that if people think that there are things that can be healed or can be overcome, I don't want to say you're wrong. I will just point you to someone like Kathy O'Brien, our dear friend Kathy O'Brien, MK Ultra survivor. If you know anything about her story, it couldn't get much worse. From the time she was born until she was in her late 20s. And she's a beautiful spirit, a beautiful woman today, helping people, inspiring people, teaching people, and she has healed, which is absolutely amazing. So I'll just say, if she can, maybe you can too, maybe we all can. But this is the way out. Because what also happens is when we are traumatized, we can't really see the truth, generally speaking. Because, see, instead of our whole being allowing us to look at something, it protects us. Why? This trauma reaction protects you from seeing something or experiencing something or learning something that could trigger you deeply. So it rejects that information even if it's truthful. And this is why traumatized people cannot see the truth. It's not that they don't want to, they can't usually see the truth. And this is another effect, is that when that is healed, we can perceive, accept the truth for what it is, and do what needs to be done to alter it if it needs altering. And that, my friends, is powerful. And that is what ultimately changes this whole trajectory. And the most beautiful realization here is that you don't need to wait for somebody to fix it for you. You don't need, trust me, all you need to do is make that choice and say, I am ready. I want to change. I know something's been bugging me. There is a reason why you can't stop doing certain things or why you can't start doing other things. And rather than beating yourself up and just thinking you're lazy or different or challenged or hormonally imbalanced and all the other things that we've been told we are, there's probably something that you don't know, don't remember, that is running this show not for your benefit. So I just encourage you, go to the link description here. We put the links there. Again, we're not associated with any of these people other than we appreciate the processes. We appreciate what they do. And if you want to learn more about the Journey process, for example, you can read Brandon Bass. She's the founder of the Journey method. You can read Brandon Bass' book, The Journey. It's her own journey and what she experienced, how she developed this method, why she did, and how she healed. And this is what we're in. And so I would just encourage you to think about this and maybe start this healing journey if you haven't yet. I know many of you already have, and you will see that the world will start the world will start to present itself to you in a very different light when you begin your healing journey. All right, my friends, much love, many blessings. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you. And we'll be back with you again very, very soon.